Hi, everyone. My name is Hellie Priester. I'm a master's student in the Sustainability Science program at Columbia University, and this interview is an assignment for the Science Urban Ecology class. My background is in marine biology, and we're going to be talking today about aquaculture and the importance of exposing young urban people to the nature that surrounds them. I'm here with Roy Arezzo, science educator and director of aquaculture at the Urban Assembly New York Harbor School. Hi, Roy. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Good to see you again.
Thanks. Tell me a little bit about your background. What are your personal ecology related interests and what led you to this point in your career?
Well, I'm old, so it's a long background, so I'm going to try and keep it shorter.
Give us the highlights.
Yeah, so I have always been interested in science and studied biology at college, and have always been interested in outdoors, even though I grew up in the city. And once I started exploring the outdoors as an adult, I realized how much I loved it and how important a resource it was for students. So I started out my teaching career teaching biology, and I worked in a middle school, and we did a bunch of programs, which I think other questions will lead me to. But one of them was we started a Trout In The Classroom program, and we started a community garden, and we started a compost system.
Awesome.
And that greening work led me to City School, where I worked for 3 years, which is one of the oldest alternative high schools in New York City. They recruited me as a greening person, but what occurred to me was it was right by the Hudson River. And I had all this experience with marine biology that I felt, well, this is a great time to get it going. You know, I'm in a saltwater estuary. And so I started a field class. And from that field class, the Harbor School folks found me before they started the school and wanted to use the field class model to design some of the curriculum in New York Harbor School. And so they recruited me. I volunteered actually to do work on the proposal. And then ultimately they recruited me to teach there, where I taught a field class and AP biology and ran some of the greening programs here on the island, including sustainability, compost, and gardening. But from my interest in food systems and my marine science background, it was very clear to me that I wanted to do something that kind of bridged greening, urban ecology, outdoor education. And the career and technology education programs here focus on getting students hands-on skills as well as preparing them for college and career. So I was recruited again, an internal shift from AP environmental science and biology, and the field class was sort of phasing out, and they moved me over to aquaculture. And I've been doing this for 6 years.
Okay. So can you tell me a little bit more about the Harbor School and what is the CTE program?
So CTE stands for Career and Technology Education. There are many initiatives across the country to do not only regular high school, but vocational work with students. And in New York State, for better or for worse, they've sort of done away with traditional vocational education, and created a career and college readiness program where schools get funding and in the perfect world training to involve students in career skills in addition to college preparation. So Harbor School was a college preparatory school, and now as a CTE school, we have funding, for example, to put them in internships and have them have hands-on career readiness experiences.
Okay, that sounds awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I wish that was available when I was in high school in the city.
Yes. You asked about my background. I don't know if we can jump around a little, if that's stuff you're questioning, but so very early on when I was working middle school and we started designing compost bins, the middle school kids I realized were working and should get paid. So I wrote some grants and they got stipends. And
That's
I
really
partnered
cool.
with different organizations to build compost bins and community gardens with high school and middle schools working together. It was pretty amazing, and there was a lot of organizations involved. GrowNYC and Open Road of New York was an organization that we worked closely with. But from that, I worked at City of School, which main focus is internships. And now as a CTE teacher, I get to keep those resources and expose seniors to and students to internships. So we partner with the Billion Oyster Project, but we partner with other organizations as well. And I think a big component of CTE that I love is me using the resources I've gained over the last 20 years of teaching to give students paid experiences.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, to offer paid experiences as a student is
And
so,
one of them is the New York Aquarium.
yeah,
We
of course.
place students there.
Actually, that leads me to my next question, which was, I know there's sort of some murkiness about the connection between the Billion Oyster Project and the Harbor School. And without going too deep into it, can you just sort of define the sort of dividing line, and what are the benefits and the potential limitations to the connection there?
It's easy for me to do. The Billion Oyster Project was born at a New York Harbor School. So that field class that I started at City Ed School, we were doing oyster gardening with the BayKeeper. And I brought the oyster gardening work that we were doing to New York Harbor School. And from that, you know, a lot of people got excited about this keystone species for very good reasons.
Very
And
good.
one of the lucky things that happened is over the years, we hired Peter Malinowski to teach science, but ultimately he started the aquaculture program that I'm not teaching, that I'm now teaching. And the beauty of him starting the program was he had a shellfish farming background. He grew up on
Right.
Fisher's Island Farm. And he realized that one, it would be good to pass off to a experienced teacher, and that's why he recruited me for aquaculture. But he also wanted to do more in not just grow oysters, but actually establish oyster reefs in New York Harbor and restore the water. And so he needed more time to do that, and he started with a few other people out of our school, the Billion Oyster Project. And the Billion Oyster Project considers us, if I worked for them and you were asking that question, their flagship school, although they work with middle schools and many other schools and educators and students all over the city. And the relationship in aquaculture, I will speak to specifically, on paper, in a perfect world, all the students through their CTE programs, no matter what it is, are working with the Billion Oyster Project. Either through internships, in class, or volunteer, weekend, or extracurricular activities. In aquaculture, we actually have a dedicated person who runs the hatchery, but this person also works with the students to help them develop skills for the Billion Oyster Project's mission. And her name is Rebecca Resner, and she's been working with me for 5-6 years. And she also is an internship site for me. So Billion Oyster Project takes, in addition to other sites, interns that for students that want to continue the work that they learn in class. So the Billion Oyster Project works with Harbor School to achieve their mission, and depending on the CTE program and the relationship, or whether it's class or internship, there are different layers to how the students engage. In aquaculture, one of the limitations is that the oyster season doesn't always line up with class.
Right.
So Rebecca and I are trying to do, the biggest limitation is that the students are growing oysters. So they definitely maintain oysters. They've done installations on reefs and got on boats. The Vessel Ops program and the policy program and the research program and the ocean engineering program and the marine systems technology program, all these programs, I hope I didn't leave anybody out, involve students in internships and in the work of the Billion Oyster Project. But in aquaculture specifically, there's been a little bit of a hole of being able to successfully grow and spawn oysters due to technology, capacity, space limitations, and the timing of the oyster season. So we have broodstock in the lab right now, and we want to work with the Billion Oyster Project to spawn in the lab and make sure some of those larvae make it out to either a reef or a middle school or be part of the livestock for this great restoration work. We also consistently through the whole program have been growing microalgae to help the Billion Oyster Project feed their oysters.
Yeah, that was actually my next question. Sorry about that. But yeah, so tell me more about the aquaculture program, what you're doing, what the students are doing, what kinds of things you're aquaculturing, and what the ultimate purpose there is. What's the end goal?
So the aquaculture program is a 3-year program, like all the CT programs, to get the students ready for college and career. And that's the basic end goal, is they will give them skills. They're leaving with a resume, they're leaving with internship on their resume, they're leaving with schoolwork in science, lab reports, research skills. We could go on and on. In a perfect world, 3 years is a long time. They would get a lot of skills.
Right.
The 10th grade program looks a lot like a marine science class where they learn about their local estuary. They do collect specimens. We have permits to collect specimens and build their own recirculating systems.
Cool.
By 11, and they focused on nutrient cycles. We visit the farm out on Governor's Island to learn about farming. And then ultimately in aquaculture, we're farming for some industry, restoration, pet industry, biofuels even. And the obvious thing is food, which I'm interested in, food systems. In 11th grades, they take their introductory experience and they do more production level aquaculture. So they produce microalgae, hopefully oysters this spring, and they do a fin fish project where they design a recirculating system and they grow tilapia. Tilapia are native, but we don't have real good temperature control in our lab yet. It is still a public school and we deal with some of those limitations. So tilapia are the most tolerant of the warm temperatures that we experience in our lab. And we don't really have the space and funding for chillers. So they then will bring that tilapia to a grow out site, hopefully through a partnership with New York Sunworks. That'll happen in the lab now, but traditionally it was at GrowNYC. They have on the farm out here on Governor's Island some large grow out aquaponic systems, and we normally give them our tilapia to grow out, and then interns work with them in the summer. And then ultimately those tilapia are harvested. And by senior year, they have enough exposure that they spend the fall reinforcing their algae work. They work on research skills and try and tweak some of the variables. They grow some brine shrimp for the fish in the lab. And then ultimately they customize their presentations and their final senior work to go with an internship more in the field they're interested in a perfect world. And then, college applications, and for those who are college bound, making sure they're all set.
So by the time the students graduate, they not only have these technical skills that are useful potentially in a professional environment, but they've also made a ton of different connections with different environmentally focused groups like the Billion Oyster Project and many others. And they have this added experience of having gone to school on Governor's Island and taking the ferry to commute to school every day.
Yeah. And we try and get the kids out at least, it doesn't happen as often as I would like because the limitations of, getting kids on boats. But and we don't have many work boats here. We have some training vessels, but the students get out on boats and they get their safe boater certificate. They get seafood HACCP certified, and we teach them how to shuck and handle food. So they do have credentials on their resume. And then you mentioned partnerships with other organizations. Baruch College has done research with our facilities and with our students. The DEC comes and visits to talk about water resources and their research on eels. We do try and expose the students to many people like you that are, either in academia or in research or in the industry, get them out to Fisher's Island Farm, expose them to these different career paths.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And on the topic of exposure, just hearing about some of this, I can't help but compare to my own experiences growing up in a high school in the city. And it sounds to me like, just from comparison, harbor school kids have got to be given so much more exposure to nature than like more typical students. So how do you think that exposure affects them throughout their life? Do you think gaining the technical skills makes them more likely to become environmental scientists, or even beyond the technical skills, do you think that the exposure to nature by itself is enough to instill love of nature and sense of stewardship in students? What's your take on that?
That's a hard question. I mean, as a science person, the data is not in, right? If I've been doing this program for 6 years, that essentially means 2 or 3 graduating classes. And, only, one or, the students that have done the full program, there's like 4 graduating classes. Some of them are still in college or still figuring out their career. And then it's hard to track all these students. So in a perfect situation where I'm answering your question professionally, I have data and I tell you where my students are.
Right.
What's
your instinct?
Well, anecdotally, alumni have come back and worked for the Billion Oyster Project. So that career option is an option. The Billion Oyster Project likes hiring alumni, and there are several alumni that work for the Billion Oyster Project, either seasonally or full-time. And then I have students who often go into, when I see what college degrees they pick when they leave here, it's often marine science, environmental science, or the other big one is business. So those seem to be the 3 most common majors. Every year we get a few students that go to an aquaculture specific school.
Cool.
And then I think harbor school in general, and not just the aquaculture program, like you said, since they are getting outdoors more, do have an appreciation. I guess the question I would ask you, does that mean change 10 years from now in terms of citizens? We've seen in our country that this is not an easy thing to change, right? Like, most of us live based on what we're eating, what we're ordering through the mail and what we're consuming in an unsustainable way, even though like I might bike to school and you might recycle or, plant trees. Like, with climate change issues, we need much bigger change than like simple respect for the environment and a good attitude about, environmental resources would provide. But I don't want to get too gloomy, but
yeah.
I think if you ask students after they've graduated, did you get, like, I run a rowing program, those same model as Clearwater, right? We get the kids on the water and they fall in love with it. And then they want to protect the water. It's a good model. Does it mean big change for the whole estuary system? I hope so. With the Billion Oyster Project work, with all these students graduating and loving this resource. But I think at the minimal, yes, they do have a connection and a good attitude about these valuable resources, knowing that they are important to protect, preserve, and conserve, use, but in a smart way so that we're not destroying the habitat.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered your question, but I think I did.
No, you totally did. I mean, and that's what I kind of anticipated was, the data isn't really out yet, but we certainly hope that it makes a difference. And I mean, personally, I think it's impressive and impactful to have a really deep love and appreciation and sense of awe of nature. I mean, I think that's valuable in one way or another, certainly.
It is valuable, sure.
Yeah.
Please don't take my skepticism about the trajectory of our planet as negative. I do love that our students are connected.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. And yeah, I battle with the negativity all the time, of course. So we are running a little bit late on time, but can I ask you just one last question?
Yeah, I got 5 more minutes.
Okay, it's a fun one.
Yay.
Surely you must have had some bizarre animal encounters in the city over the years. Can you think of what your favorite weird animal encounter was?
In New York City or in my world?
Let's say in New York City or in an urban environment.
Okay, I mean, the bird life, I've seen so much incredible, rats being destroyed by, red-tailed hawks and some of that, in my field class when I taught the ninth graders at the beginning of my career with Harvard School, we'd stumble on things like that all the time out, seeing fish jump and but the most notable urban New York City sighting I saw, it was when I was teaching the field class. Unfortunately, the kids had left for the day, but then I saw a dolphin in Newtown Creek.
Wow.
And then we reported it, and it actually got on the news.
I saw it.
Yes.
I saw it on the news.
Yeah. So we had a cool dolphin sighting. That was pretty exciting. We've had some bald eagles on the island, and also harbor seals on our docks.
Nice.
And just working with the BOP, we have a nursery, like a little eco dock, where we keep a lot of the oysters that aren't on reefs or not ready to go to reefs or slated to go to middle schools. And we see when the kids pull up the stacks, they see all sorts of amazing local species and oyster toadfish, blackfish, and sea squirts. And we've seen seahorses. Kids go crazy when we see a seahorse.
I bet.
And we've had seahorses live successfully in our lab, which is exciting. We have a nice relationship with the River Project. So they have transitioned, like some of the fish we catch, they transition them to wild through their flow-through system. The students bring them over and then they can release them, or they sometimes at the end of their season, we use our permits to get some of their fish. It's a really sweet connection.
Yeah, I think that's great. And on behalf of all young people who have grown up in this city, I'd like to thank you for giving these opportunities to kids, because whether or not it saves the planet, I think it's so important regardless. And I just thank you so much for taking the time. And I have so much respect for what you do. And I so appreciate it.
That's awesome. Thank you for saying that. And yeah, it's great connecting with you. And if you have any more questions, let's click another time to chat.